My name is Thomas Schutenhelm, and I am the Artistic Director at Network for New Music. Today, on our series Interviews with Composers, we have Adah Kaplan, one of our featured composers on our upcoming concerts, one here in Philadelphia on Saturday, January 27th, and again on Monday, January 29th. In New York City. Please check out our website for more information about these concerts. So happy to have you here, Adah. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Adah Kaplan, and I am a violinist and composer here in Philly.
Excellent. And in fact, that's where I'd like to begin, because the mission of Network is to support composers from Philadelphia and also to support young and emerging composers. And you're both of those. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, of course. So I pretty much just have a ton of people to thank for getting me to where I am today. My musical career started when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. I remember reorganizing a bookshelf and I picked up a book, and I don't remember what it was. I wish I could, but I remember that one of the characters played violin. And I turned to my mom and I was like, "Hey, I want to play violin." And she was kind of like, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about it. I think, I played piano growing up. Maybe I'll talk to your dad. Maybe we can get a piano." And I said, "I don't want to play piano. I want to play violin." And my parents put me in lessons, and I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for that. They matched me with a wonderful teacher, Elizabeth Guerrio, who quickly introduced me to composing, which was a game changer. I was introduced to composing at age 7 or 8, which is remarkably young. A lot of musicians are not encouraged to compose, which I think is very sad. But being introduced to composing so early completely changed my perspective on music. Just going through my violin career, I've always viewed music as a living art form. I've viewed it as a creator. I'm not just a performer performing works that have already been created, but I'm actively trying to dig into what the composer intended and kind of applying my composing mind to violin and my violin mind to composing. I think the two heavily impact each other. So currently I play with Philadelphia Sinfonia. I've played with them for 7 years now, starting in Philadelphia Sinfonia Players and working my way up to concertmaster of Philadelphia Sinfonia. I also play with their chamber orchestra. I play with the symphony orchestra at the University of Pennsylvania. I play with the Center City Chamber Orchestra, a student-run group, and I also am on their board and help plan their concerts. I do a lot of freelancing around the Philadelphia area, and I do a lot of composing. I also work as the managerial assistant for Melissa Dunphy, which I handle all of her emails and
Mhm.
taxes and schedule stuff and boring stuff like that, but it's quite the exciting job to see the whole behind the scenes. So I'm keeping quite busy. I'm in what I call a pseudo gap year. I finished high school a little bit early last summer online, about 9 months early. So I'm taking this year to apply to colleges as a prospective music composition major and just continue doing all of my musical work.
Yes, that certainly sounds busy and lots of exciting things both happened for you in the past and seem to be ahead of you too. Um, I wondered since you have learned music here in Philadelphia and you are both a performer and a composer. In your estimation, what makes Philadelphia a special place to learn and create?
So I could talk forever about how much being in Philadelphia has shaped me as a musician. I think our music scene is particularly special. Our city is just big enough to have a flourishing, vibrant scene with just a lot of people in it, but also small enough that everyone knows each other. And just playing in gigs for the past couple years, every time I show up, I either see someone who I already know or I meet someone who knows the same 40 people that I know. And it's like, I don't know how I haven't met you yet. I feel like there's a real feeling of community here. We have some phenomenal artistic organizations that both help introduce children to music, which is especially important, and also just, support the arts and get an art audience and kind of make our city a hotspot for creativity. We're also, positioned between Baltimore and New York, which have thriving scenes of their own. So there's just a lot of music around. I think I most likely would not have chosen to pursue music if I did not grow up in Philly. I just being here showed me what music is all about and showed me the sense of community that it can bring. So I think it's thanks to the incredible organizations here, as well as just all of the incredible artists that I've encountered. That's what makes Philadelphia, Philadelphia.
Indeed. And one of those incredible institutions and organizations is Philadelphia Sinfonia, who's going to be joining us on our concert here in Philadelphia. And I wonder if you could tell me again, when did you start playing in Sinfonia?
Yeah, I started with Sinfonia when I was 11 years old, in 2017, I believe, in Philadelphia Sinfonia Players, directed by Maestro Danielle Garrett. And then I joined Philadelphia Sinfonia Chamber Orchestra, their string orchestra, the following year, while remaining in Philadelphia Sinfonia Players. And then the next year, I moved up to the main Philadelphia Sinfonia, their most advanced youth orchestra, and I've stayed with them ever since.
Excellent. And that's directed by Maestro Gary
Very
White,
white.
who
Yep.
will also be at our concerts and assisting us with our concerts. Now, we're going to be featuring two of your compositions. So I was wondering if you could give us some insight into both of those. The first piece we're going to be performing, which will be by just the network ensemble, is your string trio, Forgiven, Eradicated. Could you give us some insight into this piece, please?
Yeah. So both of the pieces that will be on this concert were written for ensembles that I know really well and love. And this string trio, Shvikin Shvitin, Forgiven Eradicated, was written for the string trio that I played in for several years under the direction of Linda Reichert through Settlement Music School. Um, I had been encouraged by Linda to write a piece for the group, which was an incredible opportunity. And for the first year or so, I was kind of, I guess, drawing a blank. I felt like drawing a blank isn't the right word. I felt like I wanted to truly get to know the ensemble before writing a piece for them because I knew it would be something near and dear to my heart. And as I grew with the ensemble, I started to feel that I was ready. This piece came into being on Kol Nidre, which is the night before Yom Kippur. It's considered the holiest night of the year in Judaism. And I had a plan that I was going to compose all the way through Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur is a holiday where you fast. And I'm like, well, if I compose the entire time, if I get into one of those composing holes, maybe I'll be so focused that I'll forget that I'm hungry and I'll forget that I'm thirsty. And I thought that was a pretty brilliant plan. Kol Nidre rolled around and I still didn't really have any ideas about what I was going to be writing, but we were doing Zoom services that year. It was the fall of, I believe, 2021. And I was kind of sitting on my living room couch watching the TV, and the beginning notes of Max Bruch's Kol Nidre for cello began because that's how our service starts. And I started to think about how Judaism is a religion that's so influenced by music. Music is just a essential part of the religion. And I think my musicianship and my Judaism are closely connected. I connect with Judaism through music, and I connect with music through Judaism. My Judaism kind of follows me into the music that I write. And I find that really important. And hearing those notes on the cello, I pretty much decided that I was going to make my piece about Kol Nidre, because it's a beautiful thing that the most important night of the year is so closely intertwined with a melody that the general person knows. A lot of people know that gut-wrenching Kol Nidre opening melody. So I went upstairs and I kind of started to research, why is Kol Nidre the holiest night of the year? What makes this so important, and what does the Kol Nidre prayer mean? And Kol Nidre, the service itself, is just an ordinary service, but it has one prayer at the beginning of it, the Kol Nidre. The Kol Nidre isn't actually a prayer, it's a legal statement, which essentially says that any vows that we say over the next year are going to be forgiven or eradicated and pretty much rendered null, which is interesting. And then I started to go down a rabbit hole because I was wondering, well, why? Why do I have to say that any vows that I make aren't real? What's the story behind that? And as it turns out, in the 15th century, tensions between religions were high. And a lot of Jews on the Iberian Peninsula were being forced to convert to Christianity. And they were forced to make a vow, which is essentially the highest promise you could make back then, a vow to convert to Christianity. So by saying this legal statement at the beginning of the year, Jews could kind of prevent this from being a sin. They could say, hey, just so you know, any vows that I make over the next year, you're gonna erase them so that everything's fine. I can still convert back to Judaism and not have strayed. So I found that to be an interesting story, and this piece was born. It opens with the first couple notes of Kol Nidre. The whole theme will come back later, and starts by representing people walking into a synagogue. The violin and the viola kind of have a gentle pace as they begin the piece. The sun begins to set, and the piece begins to tell a story. A lot of my works are very narrative. I won't spoil too much, but it essentially tells the story of a happy Jewish colony thriving until tensions start to settle in, anxiety builds, and then the Kol Nidre prayer is recited 3 times, the same way it is in synagogue. And the piece ends in pride, because as I was thinking about this, I started to wonder why this night is important. We don't say vows anymore. It's kind of an outdated practice. There's no reason for us to be saying this statement every year. And I came to the conclusion that it's to remember our history, which is something that's very important to me. And by writing this piece, I hope to share that history and introduce it to a wider audience.
Well, thank you for that very helpful insight into both the programmatic dimensions of the piece, and also for reminding us, how integrated music is into rituals, and also that, music still has a sacredness to it in our day and age. Now we're also going to be performing, the network ensemble will perform alongside members of Philadelphia Symphonia in a rendition of your Waltz for a Hesitant Time. So could you tell us more about that piece, please?
Yeah, so I'm super excited for this performance. It's been a long time in the making, I feel. There's a whole bunch of different elements that are coming together here. Ever since I joined Philadelphia Sinfonia Chamber Orchestra, Maestro Gary White knew that I was a composer and was encouraging me to write something for the ensemble. And he always said, ever since I was a 12-year-old in that ensemble, if you write something for us, we will read it for you, which I am so grateful for his encouragement just throughout my entire musical career, and specifically my composition career.
He really is a wonderful person, and a real, someone who's a real champion of music and people. And I think he deserves special mention.
Oh, yes, for sure. So I always knew that I would have the opportunity to write something for the chamber orchestra. And again, I wanted to give it some time to breathe and kind of wait until I felt that I was ready to write something. And ultimately, coming out of isolation, I truly realized how important and transformative an experience Sinfonia was for me. And I realized just how much it meant to me and how much it had shaped me as a musician. So I decided it was time to start writing that piece. Again, like many of my pieces' origins, this one started by me sitting on my phone going down some sort of internet rabbit hole when I probably should have been doing something else. I was researching waltzes. I don't know why, but I was researching waltzes, like dances, not even musical waltzes. I was researching the dance types, and I learned about something called the hesitation waltz, which I'll give you just a really brief background story on the hesitation waltz. It came into popularity in the 1910s. It became popular because it was simple and it was easy. It's a very, very basic 3-step waltz, except there's one move called the hesitation, where the female dancer hesitates, pauses on one foot, and then drags her other foot around, and then the dance continues. It's super simple. And the whole reason it just took the waltz world by storm is because it was easy for anyone to do. However, the members of upper class society were not too fond of that, and they didn't want any random person to be able to walk into their ballroom dances and just join in. So they started overcomplicating the dance and adding all these extra steps to it, all of these contortions and twists and things that made it a whole lot more difficult. And pretty much immediately, once the dance became complicated, it faded from popularity. And now no one even knows about the hesitation waltz anymore. So while reading this, I started to think about some parallels to what my life looked like at that moment. We were coming out of isolation, and the general message that I was receiving throughout the world was, let's go back to normal. Let's get back to normal as quick as possible, back to what we were doing before. My school was instantly kind of putting us back in school all the time with our regular full days and just having long periods. And the teachers were instructed to kind of whip us back into shape. And I found the transition pretty difficult, as did a lot of people. Over the pandemic, my priorities shifted. Just the way I spent my days kind of shifted. My life started to look different. And, flash forward about a year and a half, I ended up switching to online school. So um, that might explain some stuff. But I did find the transition back to school pretty difficult. And I was finding it hard to be in these like 600-person assemblies, and there were pep rallies happening and just all of these things that were so incredibly overwhelming. And I think a lot of people needed more breaks than we were being given, which is what made the transition so difficult. So somehow I connected this back to the hesitation waltz, and I decided, when things are simple, life is going fine. And then we aren't satisfied with things being simple all the time. We try to make them complicated. We try to make them difficult. And that's when stuff starts to fall out of place. So this story, again, is a pretty narrative one. In the waltz, I represent the hesitation move with like brief slowdowns, ritardandos at the end of each phrase, which give the piece a comfortable cadence. I was also drawn to the waltz form because it's allows for a lot of freedom. It instills a sense of familiarity in the audience, in the listener, but as long as you've written a piece in triple meter, pretty much anything could hypothetically be considered a waltz. There's a lot of composers that have kind of stretched the boundaries of what a waltz is, and I like the idea of adding myself to that canon. I had a great time writing this piece. I was writing it for performers that I knew really, really well, even though the chamber orchestra shifts from year to year. I feel like I know the heart and soul that ensemble has, and I take pride in giving important lines to every single part. There's opportunities for every section of the orchestra to shine. And it tells a story of the piece starts in a place of simplicity, becomes a little bit overcomplicated, starts to pretend that everything's fine, and then quickly spirals into a place where, oh, everything is not fine. And then in the end, settles into a place of comfort. And I think it's a good message for our audiences to remind us that we don't always need to be making things more difficult for ourselves, and it's okay to take our time.
Yeah, indeed. And that's, it's insightful for all of us to have that information and to know that this has that kind of autobiographical element to it.
Yeah.
And I really like that your music is sort of embracing tradition, coming from tradition, but also what you mentioned in there is it's transformative, either in the writing of it, the playing of it, and the listening of it. And I'm sure our audiences are going to enjoy both of your pieces. Again, we're going to be featuring Adah Kaplan's compositions on our concerts later this month, January 27th, Saturday, and then we're repeating the concert on Monday in New York City on January 29th. Adah, we're so glad to get to know you and looking forward to seeing you at the performances.